What if I told you that behind the polished keynote stages and flashy AI product demos, HR leaders are asking very different questions, quietly, sometimes nervously, and often urgently? Welcome back to TIDES, where we explore the waves of change reshaping work and leadership in the age of AI. I'm your host, Shweta Malhan, and today I'm bringing back someone whose honest, sharp, and timely take on HR and tech always makes waves on social media. Lydia Wu. This time, we are flipping the lens to focus on what Lydia has been hearing on the ground from the Transform conference to other recent HR events. What's keeping HR leaders up at night? What's just hype? And what conversations are quietly shaping the future of work? We are going behind the scenes, beyond the glossy vendor booths and LinkedIn posts to talk real talk. Lydia, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me back again.
So, Lydia, let's start with exploring the vibe out there. You've just come back from Transform and a few other HR events. What was the overall energy like?
Beautifully chaotic is probably the words I would use to describe it if I have to pick a set of English words to kind of describe everything here. So I think it's beautiful because for the first time in a very long time, we are seeing innovation and disruption in the HR tech market and how HR leaders are thinking about the world. If you think about sort of I would say 2020, in a weird way, our technology developments and where things are headed was basically us automating the 1980s. If you think about it, it's like, oh, instead of putting your files in a drawer and a cabinet, here's a digital version of doing it in the cloud. But guess what? You're collecting the same information. And most of the time you're still sitting on it regardless. So I think AI is bringing that level of disruption. And interestingly enough, from a back-end coding perspective, because AI enabled technology build and development has become so much more rapid, you're also seeing new ideas in the tech market being taken to market and like being brought to life so much faster. So I would just say it's beautifully chaotic. Everyone everywhere all at once. But at the same time, there is innovation and creation in that chaos.
And how are people from HR background feeling about this chaos that you're talking about? Are they feeling hopeful, overwhelmed, skeptical, all of the above? Because HR is one domain where people come in to this practice from various walks of lived experiences, and not everybody is as tech savvy. And this
Yeah.
seems to be like a tech renaissance of some sorts that's happening within
You
HR.
know, I really do think it's a tech renaissance and we should probably start using that word more often. I might just quote you for it. But it's so interesting because it's almost like you can't look at the HR practitioner from a single dimension or a 2D lens anymore, right? Like before when we used to look at the HR technology market, we used to say, well, the typical HR buyer, blah, 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 blah. Now it's kind of like you have to go into the nuance and the mushiness of the individual, if you will. So bear with me for a second. I think there's two parts to the HR person if we were to sort of oversimplify. Part one is their personal side. If you go out and ask HR people, how are they using AI tech? Are they embracing it? Most of the time they will tell you like, yeah, I love ChatGPT. Like, here's my preferred tools. Here's what I've used it for. It's great, blah, blah, blah. You shift that lens into a workplace environment. It's almost like you get a near 180 reaction, if you will, in the sense of, oh my God, it's going to take away my job. It's going to do all of these things. I don't trust it. I don't know how to rely on it. I don't know how to talk about it. So I think there's some nuance, if you will, not in the technology, but in our current work environments that is putting a pause and sort of like a moment on AI adoption and AI purchases in a way. And especially you see that coming to life in HR. And I think the different functions of HR also look at AI differently. And I kind of track that by just looking at sort of how many solutions are available per functional category. And there are definitely ones that are standing out more than others.
Which functions are standing out from your perspective? What comes to mind is recruitment, because every time we talk about AI, recruitment is the first one to be talked about. Are you seeing that and more?
It's that, right? So I'm actually going to quote like a friend of mine, Trent Cotton, what he said to me the other day, which is TA when it comes to any technology is always the first to try and first to die. And I told him we need that on a t-shirt because literally you are seeing it left, right, and center in the AI world. Every little bit of the sourcing, recruiting, onboarding process has now been sort of diagnosed and dissected into an AI solution. I literally sat through a demo and briefing yesterday where I had to pause the person halfway through and ask them the question like, hey, you do realize I've seen 2 other solutions from your competitors who pretty much resemble your solution, even at the UI level, to about 95% similarity, right? So it's that level of sort of over inundation, if you will, of the technology in the talent acquisition space. Not saying that is a bad thing. I think talent acquisition is always the first to come up. I'm also seeing it a lot in the learning, health, and well-being space as well, in terms of how do you put AI together to diagnose the skills problem that we've had forever and ever across enterprises. How do you look at performance management through AI and all of that fun stuff? The third part I think that's picking up is in the people analytics space. And if you can tell, there's a correlation of the amount of data that you're expected to process versus how quickly we get you AI as a solution. So I think there's that part of it too. One thing I will say, and that's like a product idea out there for anyone that's listening to this, one area I am not seeing AI, and I genuinely would love to see it, is in that total rewards and compensation space. Because if you think about the quote unquote art and science of pricing a job, there really needn't to be any art of it. It really should be down to a science, given the amount of data that we have out there. But somehow there is still that art and science balance to it. And I've talked to a few folks who are in that comp space, and they're like, yeah, we're kind of thinking about it, but we don't know exactly where to take an AI solution in this space.
Yeah, that's so true. And when you look at the AI tech space, Lydia, I'm really curious because a couple of points you made. One was around people from HR world who are going there to the events to learn more, to explore more. They are feeling fear and they're feeling overwhelmed. So I would love for us to double click on why they're feeling that way. And the second point that you made was around the fact that you're also seeing new types of technology emerging, which is beyond our typical recruitment solution or learning solution. So I'd love for you to share what are the new things, because I think that's really critical for us to all understand how this landscape is evolving to meet the future of work needs versus solving for what we already have here and now and augmenting it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's dive into the whole fear and uncertainty part of it. I think there's an aspect where AI is moving so fast. And I think you and I might have talked about this in the last podcast that we recorded. It's about the idea that before, when something came to HR, it's gone through the consumer market. It's gone through the enterprise market. Like when we had our movement into the cloud, there are consumer technology that was already in the cloud. Enterprise at that point was already in the cloud. We were sort of the last mover to go into the cloud from a pure landscape perspective. So we had lessons learned. We had people who knew what they were doing, who understood HR, and who can marry the two together and say, hey, HR, I need you to do XYZ before you move yourself into the cloud. Now it's like academics, researchers, enterprise, consumers, HR is going into this thing all at once. And it feels messy. And I think a lot of that fear is coming out of the messiness and how rapid information is coming at you, right? So I've been in this space dedicated for about a year and a half, almost 2 years at this point. And even then, I still have whiplash some days of like, wait, who just released what? What's going on? Like, what are we looking at? Who just came to market? And this is spending sort of every waking moment in this market. So I can only imagine what it's like for the HR professional that is working sort of 60, 80 hours a day, trying to keep everything balanced in this environment, trying to keep their mental health intact and everything else in between, and still try to stay on top of AI technology. So it is a little bit overwhelming. And in a way, if I flip the lens to the other side of it, I'm not sure if every solution provider is helping us in this scenario, because inherent to the human instinct, fear, uncertainty, and doubt sells, right? Like if you're afraid of something, you're more likely to buy a solution that you think could solve the problem. So tapping into that instinct, there is a lot of marketing and sales added, just like, ooh, if you do this, that something bad's going to happen. If you don't buy this compliance tool, you're going to be way out of compliance. Your data is going to be sold everywhere. If you don't buy this other thing, something terrible is going to happen to your organization. And I think subconsciously that really feeds into an HR practitioner and all of our lizard brains to say, you got to do something. But simultaneously, the reality and the constraints in the organization that you're working in, so budgetary constraints or resource constraints, for example, is preventing you from going out there and buying everything that exists in this mess, if you will. So I think that's also playing a lot into the fear and doubt of things. But one thing that I am very optimistic about, so I think coming out of the Transform conference conversations, there is a lot more pragmatic views on what AI is and what AI does. If I were to compare this, the type of conversations and the hype I'm looking at today versus a year ago, I think we've definitely tempered our expectations a little bit and have started to become a lot more realistic. I'm hearing a lot more CHROs talking about it's about the problem, it's about the outcome, it's not about the tool itself. I'm not buying another shiny object unless you can prove that you're really going to work. One of the more profound things I've heard one of the people leaders say at the conference was the fact that, yes, I do have an AI budget. However, you have to realize that AI budget is not for the purchase of technology only. I'm well aware of the fact that I need to look at my org structure again. I need to look at my processes again. I need to look at my data stack again in order to get me to that AI realm. And whether I like it or not, that's the entirety of the bucket of money that I have to play with. So I'm not going to be buying solutions left, right, and center. And I think in that insight alone, you can really see and start to tell that people are becoming more realistic about what AI is capable of and more educated on the groundwork that they have to do before they go ahead and purchase and adopt AI solutions.
That is fantastic. And did you also get a sense that beyond the platform providers, there are players in the market who are helping the HR leaders to unpack what problems do they want to solve for or come up with their AI integration and adoption and evolution strategy just for HR as a capability? Or is it still a very platform provider heavy space right now?
So I think it's more advisor heavy, especially if you know the Transform community, you know it's also a very fractional HR executive heavy community as well. I think in that regard, there's more of a support ecosystem there in terms of what technology solutions are available, who is there to help you to think through the implementation, adoption, and everything along those lines. That said, I go back to my comment about everything everywhere all at once. It's really, really challenging. And I would almost say it's unfair to expect or claim expertise in this world right now. It's almost like you need to be able to say, I don't know. Here's where I can help you. And here's where we're going to have to do a little more homework together mutually.
I'm also really curious to know because when we talk about AI integration into the platforms, and I'm getting the sense that every platform provider out there must be saying, I'm AI enabled. My platform has AI. But how are they thinking about AI? The way I'm interpreting AI integration into an organizational DNA beyond HR is that AI can either help with automation, it can help with augmentation, which is what we do when we use ChatGPT to do our work. And with AI agents in the mix, now parts of work can completely been delegated to AI to do. What are these platform providers promising? Automation, augmentation, agentic
Man,
AI, all of it.
what
And
are
will
they
the buyers
promising?
understand it?
What are they promising or what are they delivering? Okay. So at the risk of sounding like I'm standing on a soapbox, I'm going to rant for 2 hot seconds. Apologies, audience. Feel free to skip through this part if you don't like it. I got demoed on Figma at a
Hmm,
conference.
hmm.
And for those of you who don't know what Figma is, it's basically a sort of graphic tool for a lot of product designers to go in and build mock-ups on to tell you what the final product could look like. There's nothing sitting behind the actual like pictures of it. It's just pictures of what you imagine the product to look like. Imagine like a doodle on a piece of napkin, but taken to life. That's Figma. And I got demoed on Figma as if it was a real tool claiming to be an intelligent AI enterprise assistant. So essentially an HR generalist, if you will. So I think there is, unfortunately, because of how big this market is and how much potential it has, you do have some messiness in it as well in terms of people overusing marketing adage along the words of like AI agent, AI enabled automation, like we do AI. I don't blame them necessarily, but I think from a buyer standpoint, you do need to take a lens of caution when you're looking at tools and when you're looking at marketing language, right? Because a lot of times someone will claim like, oh, I have AI XYZ. And I'm like, okay, show me. What does it look like? It's natural language processing. Can you say it's AI? Yeah. I mean, natural language processing is absolutely part of AI. But is it the AI that all of us are expecting to see in the solution in 2025? Probably not. So I think there are some blurry lines there in terms of understanding what AI is and what you're buying into. And I think the second thing too is nobody ever highlights the amount of integration work you're still expected to do. And it drives me nuts. This is where the soapbox is definitely going to come out, because here's the thing. For AI to automate, unless you're telling me that you're going to rip and replace your entire enterprise stack and put in a singular AI enabled stack, which I'm still waiting for someone to come up with, by the way, you have to build your AI stack with pipelines into other bits of the technology. So that integration, that API problem, we've been having in HR tech for like 2-3 decades at this point. And quite frankly, MSPs are making a lot of money on at this point. That is still going to exist, and that is going to exist at an exponential rate. Because here's the thing. Previously, when you need to feed from your core HRIS into a different system, you can say like, I'm going to run it once a week. If it breaks, I kind of sort of know where it broke, because it's one single CSV file or one API call that's going out. And if it alerts, you know where the alert happened. Now it's multiple data pipelines going back and forth across all of your third-party systems, depending on how many point solutions you're going to build or acquire. And on top of that, it's your historical data stack that it's going to be pulling information from. So whatever integration problems or challenges you've had before, I feel like without proper planning before you go and implement AI, those integration problems are going to explode by 10, if not 100-fold by the time you roll out an AI solution.
Yeah, yeah. So, which also speaks to the fact that HR buyer is not a single HR buyer anymore. They have to have different capabilities sitting at the table collectively making that decision or a choice to say, hey, I'm going to plug this out of my tech stack, HR tech stack layer, and I'm going to put this back in. Which brings me to the next question. I haven't seen many HR teams which have that tech capability to support their tech ecosystem within HR. Usually it's a partnership that has to be struck with the IT team. So much so that sometimes I've even heard that IT team goes and shops for HR without HR being in the loop, and it just blows my mind, but that happens. So how should HR tackle that? Like, yes, we have to solve for talking to the vendors, but the first step to your point is figuring out how does this piece fit into my jigsaw puzzle internally? If they have to partner with IT, does IT have capacity to support HR at this point in time? Because we are at the end of the day an enablement team.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple layers to this, right? I think the first is HR, whichever HR team you're talking to, being very clear to themselves about who they are and who they want to be. You might want to be like the HR department that buys all of your own HR tech, but you may currently be the the HR department that's just processing payroll and offering employee experience and support. There's nothing wrong with that, but without a clear alignment and a clear definition of who you are when you want to go, it's really hard to have these conversations. It's going to feel like very piecemeal for both parties in the conversation. And I think once you get through okay, do I actually want to be a tech enabled HR function? Then the next question is, to what degree of tech enablement do you really need to be, right? Because there are ways of owning the tech strategy, AKA logically understand how the HR process works, where the technology needs to plug into the process and how it interacts with the process, versus picking and integrating the technology. I would never claim myself to be a full tech person, even though I've been in the industry for about 15 years at this point, because I cannot build an integration if my life counted on it. Let's just kind of put that out there. But at the same time, I understand the nature of how integrations work. I understand the level of instructions to which I need to give a technical team to say, hey, I need this thing to go one way. I need this thing to go both ways. Here's how often I need the call to be. I think HR needs to get a lot better on not really the technical side of things, but the logical and the procedural part of how to run the HR business. And I know for a fact that all of us know it. It's just a matter of articulating it and putting it on paper. So whoever is working with you, be it the IT team, the procurement team, an outside party, whatever it may be, they understand what you're talking about when you say like, hey, I need this AI solution. This is what I intend for it to do. So that's one part of it.
Mhm.
And I think the second part where that partnership comes in, once the tech is implemented, is IT can only go so far in understanding and supporting the data and compliance risk pertaining to HR and people data out in the ecosystem. I would say, go as far as to say they understand about 80% of it, but the rest of the 20% compliance in terms of how payroll data interacts with benefits data, interacts with your health data and all of that fun stuff, I would never expect IT to be experts in that. And therefore, I would never expect them to be able to close a gap on how those data categories are treated during an integration or an implementation. And I think this is the other aspect where HR needs to come in as well to provide that level of functional guidance.
Absolutely. And sometimes the employee data is so sensitive that opening it up to people beyond HR is also a hurdle or a challenge for organizations. Like, how do you give access to people sitting in IT to payroll information of all your organization? How do you
Yeah.
manage that potentially? But pivoting to AI integration, where do you see the readiness gaps in the HR teams? What are they struggling most with beyond technology?
I think it's procedural. So, and this is going to sound a little controversial. So here's the thing. I think unless you get into a HR business partner or a CHRO role or a very senior role in HR, when you're kind of coming up the ranks, it's really, really challenging to see where HR functions connect with each other, right? Since we've been building most of our HR teams around the concept of the three-legged stools, like your centers of excellence, your business partners, your HR services team, we almost function in silos. Like when you grow up in the world of total rewards, benefits, and compensation, you don't think about how benefits and compensation is feeding your, let's say, recruiting policies, how that's possibly feeding your analytics services, how that's possibly feeding your HR services, how it's impacting payroll, so on and so forth. Just as when you grow up in the world of talent acquisition, let's say as a sourcer or recruiter, just doing initial first round interviews, you don't think about how the way you're entering your candidate data, the way you're entering the reason for acceptance or rejection, or the amount of data and content you put around that candidate profile could be the grounds of which your AI tool gets trained later on in automating the selection of candidates. And this is kind of where we get into the ethics and bias of a lot of the tools as well. So for me, above and beyond the technology, I think it's understanding the integrated way of which information is used and flows across HR, as well as how procedures flow across HR much better beyond the senior levels to really be able to then say like, okay, I see the connectors here and this is what we're going to do about it. Here's how we're going to solve it.
I would really want us to double click on what you just mentioned because it's such a key, important piece. And I want to unpack a little bit with you the how of this. Like, if an HR team is bought into what you're suggesting, that yes, we need to understand the full end to end workflow of how our HR as our business unit or function or capability operates so that we can see what is the connectivity between different pieces. We can understand where are the friction points, where are the barriers, so that then we can decide, oh, these pieces of my HR capability or workflow, I should automate with AI. These are the pieces where we should train our people so that they can use AI to augment their capability. While these pieces are so black and white that they should just be delegated to AI and then make informed choices around what to build, buy, borrow from a technology perspective. But that's a huge undertaking. So, for an organization who wants to do that, where should they start and how do they go about doing it?
It feels huge because what you're asking for is a fundamental culture change, right? And it's one of those things that process is easy. Process documentation is easy because you just have to write it down. It's tangible. You can touch it. But to get to what you're truly asking for, which is an integrated approach to HR, this is where the mushy part of being human comes in. This is where any sort of imposter syndrome, ego, pride, everything that it makes up a human and makes us human in a way, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, comes into play. So first and foremost, it's almost like you have to ask all of your HR leaders to take their egos and not just verbally park it at the door, but very literally park it at the door. Because in order to get to that level of collaboration and understanding, you have to be comfortable in saying and accepting, I don't know. Tell me more. And those types of phrases to build that level of understanding and to build that level of empathy and appreciation across the functions, right? So I'll give you an example. One of the HR teams I worked with way back when, it was a project I was on with the benefits team. And it should have been a very, very simple analysis of benefits data, open enrollment, ins and outs, and all of that fun stuff. Except for some reason, they were guarding their open enrollment process like it was the KFC recipe, essentially, that nobody would have access to. And it took forever to really understand the process. And I would say without understanding the process of it, it was near impossible to deliver on what they were asking for. So it's almost like that level of gatekeeping that in a way has kept some of us in HR alive for a little bit, that has to go out the door. You have to start appreciating that you're not in your role because of the knowledge you have, because trust me, AI can do that really, really quick. You are in your role because of the human experience and your ability to lead. And I think in that mindset shift change alone, you can start creating a lot more dialogues and conversations around, hey, what are you working on? Like, I'm curious, how does that work? That type of thing. And then gradually build towards a sentiment of collaboration. And I think a lot of this also resides in the hands of the CHRO or the HR leader as well. And like, stop pitting your people against each other. If you genuinely want an HR department that succeeds, that is above and beyond the compliance and sort of check the box payroll function that everyone thinks you are, you really need to rally your team together. And you can only do that by building your team up and not taking them down.
Yeah. And traditionally, we've spent so much time operating in silos. It's not an easy undertaking for any leader. So I totally get that. And there are many ways to solve for this. And I'd love your opinion on this is to just have like a workshop, like an ideation workshop to start with all your sub-functional areas in your HR team to talk about. Let's imagine the future HR capability. Let's let go of how we've operated in the past, envision a future state of an organization, and then what role, what value does HR bring to the mix, to the organization in that context, and how should we structure ourselves in that go, and then get into what's keeping up at night, keeping us up at night, what's working, what's not working, and collectively prioritize initiatives or areas of your HR capability that you want to focus on. Because to your earlier point, there are always going to be budget and resource constraints. Like if I have $100 to spend as CHRO, how am I going to make that decision on, am I spending it on recruitment or performance or L&D? Everybody's going to ask me for that piece of that $100, right? But not all three might be a good place to start all at once. Prioritization has to
Absolutely.
happen. And collective prioritization might be one way, to your point, to rally everybody together, one common mission, one common goal.
Yeah. And I think just a really practical idea on how to do that together. So this is not my idea. Someone shared it with me. It was a VP of HR at Manulife who did this basically in-house, and they just had a prompt-a-thon essentially. They brought everyone together and basically told them like, hey, start writing prompts on the most like powerful HR use cases you can think of and demo to us the end result of that. Now that entire team has a library of prompts to which they can engage with AI, their everyday challenges, and just work a lot faster and kind of start appreciating each other's lenses a little more, the nuances and how you even write a prompt, right?
Yeah, and that's such a beautiful example of your earlier point on looking at a use case or a problem and then leveraging the tool to help you get there versus just looking at the next new shiny object or a marketing pitch by a platform provider. So that's so powerful. So thank you for sharing that. I'm also going to circle back on our original earlier conversation around what jumped out to you in those conferences as pieces of technology or solutions that you were wowed by?
I wouldn't say pieces of technology necessarily because I'm still waiting to see what has teeth because there's a lot of brilliant new ideas, some of which I'm like, oh, this is so cool. This is super nerdy, but I love it. And some of them like, okay, I can see it. I don't know who's going to buy it, but I'm genuinely waiting to see what the market says about a lot of the technology that I saw while I was there. Two things that jumped out to me. I think one on the positive side, one on the sort of neutral side. The neutral side that jumped out to me is for some reason, we are still trying to reinvent what I call the internet era of doing work, right? So a lot of times you come across a vendor, they're like, oh yeah, you know that thing that you've done, for example, open enrollment or EAP or learning and development or scheduling meetings. Okay, so we've applied AI and now you can do it 10 times faster. And I'm sitting here going like, I appreciate 10 times faster, but does that thing really need to be done? Is 10 times faster really the answer, or is some other solution the true answer to the problem that I'm trying to solve? I don't know about that. So that's sort of my neutral view. The really hopeful view I have coming out of here was actually from a keynote session. And I think this is with a data scientist from Google, essentially, or a former data scientist at Google. And it was around the idea that everyone's freaking out about, OMG, AI is going to take my job. I don't know what to do with it. I'm being replaced, et cetera, et cetera. And what she said was actually incredibly powerful, which is around the idea that AI is never going to replace you because the power of being human is the power of creativity. That level of creativity and putting new ideas together and gluing thoughts and connecting ideas together, AI is still a long ways away from being able to do that. So I think the future really lies with those who are innovating and creating and inventing as opposed to repeating. Like if a role is repetitive in nature only, I can see that being replaced by machines and technology very quickly. But that said, if a role requires some form of thinking and putting together content and some form of supporting humans along a journey and kind of getting to the mushy bits of the human, which if you think about it, that's most of HR. I'm not sure if AI can replace those roles or if it's just redefining them a little bit differently than what we're used to.
I totally agree with you on that point because we also talk about jobs being taken away. There will be roles or pieces of work that are so black and white, so repetitive that it doesn't make sense for human to do. But if our mindset is that I'm used to doing this and I'll continue to do this, and then I'm feeling terrible that my job is going to go away, that for that mindset, I think the challenge that we are posing is look at what you can do differently, be creative about it, because yes, we don't have new jobs defined yet, but as old black and white job tasks are fading away, newer ones will come up. And as they come up, we should prime ourselves to jump on that opportunity that yes, our speed to learning in that scenario is going to be really quick because we are already thinking about a future state. We might not have defined it yet, but we know at least in which direction that future state is going. So jumping on to that journey will be much more smoother and easier and faster for us if our starting point is that we want to let go of old and start looking at how to do new.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest challenges for HR in this regard is letting go of the idea of knowledge hoarding. Because if you think about it, I think everyone listening to this probably knows one HR person who takes pride in the fact that they can recite all the compliance laws, all the regulations across the states, the provinces, and everything else in between. And then that's what makes them so good at their job, or they believe that's what makes them so good at their job. Except now you throw AI into the mix that can do everything that person does, except at 100 times the speed, X amount of the customization and everything else. And you get to that point in the person feeling a little irrelevant in how they engage with their work. And in that sense of irrelevance, I think also brings out a sense of fear as well. So in a way, I think it's also an identity exercise for a lot of us personally to understand how do we relate to our professional work in the HR realm, and what part of us do we really want to retain versus what part of us are we okay to let go from an identity perspective.
So, talking about that, I would love to also pick your brain on what signals are you getting from the leadership of HR, like be it CHROs, chief people officers, talent officers, senior leaders in HR. What are they most curious about and what are they most concerned about today?
So I think the curiosity is always with what's out there, what new is coming out, what can it do more for me on. I don't think that's changed at its core for the last little bit. I think the fear component is real though. It's really the fear of, I want to say irrelevance, not just as a leader, but also as a function in the organization, because the general market sentiment towards HR right now, for better or worse, is not incredibly positive. We still have yet to be able to turn around our perception as a cost center in the organization into a profit center or some sort of a support center instead. So I think there is sort of an underlying fear across all HR organizations in terms of, if I don't prove my worth and if I don't prove my value in the next X amount of time, what's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to my team? All of that fun stuff. And there's also a level of urgency paired with hesitance. So the urgency is, the AI technology is out there. My leadership team is pushing me to use AI. So I think it'll help. And I really, really have to get on it. The hesitance comes with the fact that I'm not seeing any of my peers showing real ROI on the AI technology that they purchased a year ago. Is it really going to work for me? What is it going to take for me to really put into play? So I think there's a lot of conflicting ideas and a lot of conflicting emotionals in my professionally as well when it comes to sort of like the actions HR leaders are taking and the sentiments that they're kind of taking to the market as well.
Sounds like the HR leadership is still thinking about their and the energy and focus is still on making sure that their HR capability is adding value and is still relevant in the long run. What about the business transformation? Is that not on their radar? Because AI is not just shaping the future of work in HR, it's also shaping the future of work collectively in the organization. Are they even thinking about it, or is that on their radar at all?
They are. They're absolutely thinking about it, but the sense I'm getting is that it's a matter of sort of order of operations, if you will, right? Like brackets first and then multiplication sort of deal. It's in the idea that unless I get my HR house in order and I can prove that we are able to do what we say we will do and put the money where our mouth is, essentially, I'm not going to have a seat at the enterprise table to be able to talk about business transformation. So it's almost like post pandemic era, we got punted back into the world of proved to us that you need to exist and the value of your existence before we invite you back to the big kids table again. So much so to a point where across a lot of the vendor solutions, there's a conversation of, do you continue selling to HR or do you sell directly to COOs and CFOs? And what does that look like? Now, I understand the vendors are under obviously investor pressure and financial returns pressure and all of that fun stuff. So it's a complete, coming from their lens, it's a complete valid point. But I think it also speaks a lot to the aftermath of what HR is going through and just the overall market sentiment of what it's like to work in an HR role under the current conditions.
Is it also because vendors are pitching beyond HR because they feel like HR is not understanding their value proposition, or their HR and the vendor are not speaking the same language because vendor is speaking business and HR is speaking.
Not at all. So funny enough, they do believe the HR buyer and the power user resonate very heavily with what they have to offer, at least the ones I've been speaking to. However, it's the access to funding and budget and who owns it. It's the fact that HR budget has been sliced and diced left, right, and center so much over the last decade that we're struggling to like have headcount at this point as opposed to buying that new tech stack, even though there's a necessity for it. So I think it's sort of like taking the solution to where, whether we like it or not, the current bucket of budget is in the enterprise, as opposed to really working with the users who will benefit the most from it and actually use it.
That's a very good point.
It's a risk of oversimplification too, right? If you think about it, because it's the idea. Let's say if someone with a finance solution making this up comes to me and say like, oh yeah, I can automate everything, which is according to our vendor adage, they will tell you AI can do everything. We'll take care of everything. I'd be like, okay, well, I don't know enough about the function. So I'm going to choose to believe you because you sound reasonable enough and you have a decent market reputation. So let's go with it. And sure enough, a couple months down the road of an implementation, they're going to run into that where HR is going to look at them and have an I told you so moment. But by
Yeah.
then, it's going to be way too late for anybody to jump into that conversation and resuscitate it.
And I think this is where one of the things that HR, if they're not doing already, need to also work on is the perception of the work that we as HR professionals do with the rest of the business. Because the perception out there still is that if I'm going through change, I will call HR when I need to make headcount shifts. That's not what HR does. That's just one part of piece of work that HR does. There's so much that we do behind the scenes which doesn't get the visibility with the rest of the business. And people in the business call us only when they need to hire somebody, fire somebody, or there are employee relation issues to be
Yeah.
tackled.
And you know what's so interesting? So I published an article on this maybe a couple days ago. It's a carousel essentially. But I almost feel like HR has been going about this whole ROI conversation wrong in that we were trying to be finance in talking about ROI in the, oh, if I buy X tool, I will yield Y amount of savings. When the real power of HR is that ideation synthesis. It's the ability to move an organization faster. It's the ability to drive downtime to decision. It's the ability to zoom in on talent decisions and being able to optimize that. And I don't know if we spent enough time talking about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think so because we are so bogged down by everyday tactical things, which is very interesting because on one end, we feel like they're so tactical, they consume all our energy and capacity, and we don't have time to be strategic. Yet on the other side, we are sensing fear of leveraging AI to free up that time and space and capacity so that we can spend time on those higher order strategic things, which will help us build the right perception with the business, where we can be a business enabler as they go through this transformation. And one of the things that comes to my mind is this organizational change management capability. To your point, if we are the facilitators of the conversations in the business, we are helping them make right choices and decisions. That's a heavy part, a huge part of organizational change management. What do you
Yeah.
think about?
I mean, I think it's the mushiness in being human, right? It's like if you look at organizational change management, and honestly, the word change management makes me cringe a little bit because it's almost like saying puppy management or toddler management. There are just certain forces of nature that you don't mess with, and I think human nature is one of those things. But that said, if you think about how we've done it, it's a very formulaic approach of if I do X, I will achieve Y and Z and so on and so forth. Ask any person in their personal lives, when was the last time that you formulaically told yourself, if I do this, I will get that. And that was the only thing that you needed to consistently to drive yourself to do that thing and change your habits. Probably very rarely. Like the same thing happens in the workplace. And for some reason, we just never take that into consideration when we execute change management. It's almost like when it comes to enterprise change management, we take the human out of the equation, we take the emotion out of the equation, and we tell ourselves, as long as we get the adoption numbers, bingo, we're done, let's move on with life. And I don't think that's the right approach to it. And it's almost like HR needs to be at that center of the conversation shift of how do you use technology to kind of go from that sort of many to one model into a one to many model where you are looking at a more personalized approach to change management. And a really brilliant researcher said to me a couple of weeks ago, actually, she's like, think of this as like a fish and water. When something goes wrong, do you change the water or do you start adjusting the little micro environments with which the fish currently lives in? You don't have to change the water every time. And somehow we treat change management in the enterprise as us having to refresh a tank full of water every single implementation.
100%. And I totally echo your sentiment. Why do we even call it management of change? I mean, the example that you're giving resonates with how I look at change. It's like creating an environment that enables and facilitates change, because change has to happen from grassroots level. Top down approaches, giving a step by step playbook. Yes, we did it in the past in previous digital transformations. And that's why the success rate of those transformations was also not that great. 70% of digital transformation efforts, one stat says, didn't meet the required outcomes that we were looking for. It was because, one, we called it managing change. So that means decisions and choices were made. And then the change management team came in and did the comms and the training.
You just forced it down someone's throat. You were the mechanism to which force, yeah.
That's right. But if we enable change, if we create the right environment where right people are talking about right things at the right time and solving right problems, and it's both a top down, bottoms up approach where we have the right voices at the table at the right time, then you're facilitating change to happen. You're not pushing change, or you're not, using a top down approach to say, hey, we just implemented SAP in this format. It changes the way you do your job. So learn this new process and procedure to do your job. If you do it right, training and communication might be just this small piece of the larger equation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right, HR has all the right chops to be doing that for the rest of the organization.
Yeah, we just need to be able to roll up our sleeves and get ready to deal with the mushiness of it, right? I think a lot of times, if I were to reflect on the past decade or so, HR has been sort of drilled in this mentality like, you are a business line, act like a business line, know how to talk about your ROI, know how to take a formulaic approach to everything, to a point where we almost deleted the human aspect out of our jobs.
Well, in our last segment, I'm curious to learn from you. What did you observe in your travels that was not being talked about enough? What is still being overlooked when it comes to HR and AI?
Okay, this might be an entirely biased opinion, and it probably is. But one thing that irks me to no end is how much we are talking about AI ethics, bias, and compliance as if it's a technology problem. Meaning, like, if you buy this tool and audit your AI, then you will be compliant. Or if you do these things for your technology, then you will not have bias. I feel like we're disregarding the whole aspect of the conversation where AI is us. It's trained on the data that we have produced. It is using every decision pattern that you have indicated in your historical data and is mirroring it back to you in a much more rapid form. So in that regard, yes, talk about ethical AI, and yes, use technology to kind of help you get there. But let's not forget the fact that it might be a much more systemic problem than you realize. So without changing culture, action, and how you do things, deleting certain data points and retraining your AI differently is just a temporary solve. It's a matter of time before that bias pattern comes right back at you again. And I think it's that frame of thought around the conversation of ethical AI that kind of bothers me a little bit. And I don't think we're talking enough about it, in the sense that it's not a checkbox. It's a journey, it's a culture change, and it's something that takes time to get right.
And these are all things which are new for HR. They might not have had to look at ethics and bias in the same way that they have to today in any of the past transitions, changes, or technical implementations. So, what can we give them as a few pointers or tips so that they don't see this as a tech problem? I mean, there's no one, I'm totally aware that these are such new challenges that we are facing, that there's no like drawn out playbook or set path to solve for these, but we're all experimenting. So what experiments would you suggest to organizations to do as they're
For
trying to
sure.
solve for
I
this?
think for me, it's a reframing exercise, right? When we see a biased decision, your immediate instinct should be the technology got it wrong. I would ask the question, what was fed into the technology to get you this result? Turn it from judgment into curiosity. And I think it'll tell you a lot more about the systemic nature of a lot of the things that are happening in the organization. And then the second part of it is just not panicking, because yeah, this problem has existed for a very long time. I think awareness and admission is probably step one to correction. And it's really about kind of working with all the parties to gradually understand the challenge and then figure out how you can overcome it. The worst thing that you can do, quite frankly, is to see the wrong decision coming out of AI and be like, okay, that's it, game over. AI doesn't work. Let's all move on. We're going to delete the system. That's not going to work in the long run.
I love that reframing piece, first of all. And second, I think there are people or pockets of expertise in organizations that HR can go find and collaborate with or partner with. One thing that I feel at this point in time that HR needs to keep an open mind for is that, to your earlier point, we don't have all the answers, and if we don't have all the answers, we have budget, resource, headcount constraints. Look inward. There are so many areas of expertise in an organization, and this is the time when everybody would be like, yes, I would love to do something different. Let me go help HR with a new problem, a novel problem that they're trying to solve for. So expand beyond your HR team into broader organizational ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I'm starting to see more of, and I really encourage everyone to do, is just reach out to people on LinkedIn. Like literally, I would say 8, 9 out of 10 times, people will get back to you. So ask the question, because chances are all of us are figuring it out at the same time.
Yep, that is so true. Well, Lydia, this was awesome. Is there anything that we didn't get to cover in our conversation today that you would like to share as we wrap up our conversation?
I think just a little shameless self plug. If anyone's listening to this and curious to know more about what AI looks like in HR and like all of the HR tech stuff, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn, YouTube. Whoops, did I think that out loud? And I can promise you, I will keep everyone up to date in a mostly human manner as much as possible.
So, Lydia, thank you so much for another refreshingly real conversation. You've reminded us that beneath all the hype, HR is still about people, and the way we lead this transformation matters. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave us a review, or share it with your favorite HR rebel. And as always, keep riding the tides of change with curiosity and courage. Until next time, take care.